Hello everyone, welcome back. I am Fer and this is Deciphering Phyrexian, the Praetor special. Now, this video, like all my videos, past, present and future, is brought to you by my Patreons, who right now is just Otiosum, but if you would like to join, the link is there in the description and you get access to 8 exclusive Patreon videos. But let's go to the translations. Now, in this episode, we are going to translate the Vorinclex card, because another fellow Phyrexian translator, Citrus Inferno, told me that they were the most interested about this one card. So, Citrus, this one's for you. First, let's read the card in English. Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger. Legendary creature, Praetor. I checked the pronunciation. I think I finally am pronouncing it right. Praetor. It has trample, and whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. And whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Man, like this Vorinclex card and the previous one of Jinky Taxes are like super oppressive. It feels like you just play them and you win, unless someone has removal right in that very instant. But well, anyway, also you should know that, just a reminder, Phyrexian is supposed to be written top to bottom and left to right, and so for that I rotate the card and I cut the text and arrange it in the order it would be written in universe. Okay, so now let's analyze this card. First, the name. We know that here it says Vorinclex, which, by the way, is how we know, for example, that this vowel has an O sound, that this has an R sound, that this has an N sound. The name Vorinclex helped us to decipher a lot of sounds with a lot of confidence. And we know that this is supposed to be the voice of hunger. And we see that this is a word separator symbol. So perhaps maybe this is voice and this is hunger. But maybe it could be the other way around. Right now, I'm not sure. But we know that this here it says legendary creature, Praetor. Not much to say there, just that this is creature, legendary, and Praetor. Come to think of it, it's interesting that Praetor in Phyrexian ends also with an R. So maybe it is pronounced similarly to Praetor is in English. Interesting. Well, we know that it has trample, and it begins with the first 3 symbols that all abilities in Phyrexian begin. And also, Citrus Inferno told me that there's at least one other word that begins with these 3 symbols. It's a word for immortality. So that's interesting. I'm gonna be looking more into that in a future video. And well, whatever this means, I think maybe it means to go over or maybe literally to trample or something. Also, I think it has to be a compound word. It is too complex to be just a single word. Oh, because remember, and this is important, that we have 3 main tools that we use right now when deciphering Phyrexian. And well, actually 4 tools. They are the word order, that is SOV. We know that it has a consonantal root system and agglutination. And finally, well, the words we already know, right? How do I write it? Memory, vocabulary, maybe? And finally, just plain logic. Sometimes you can decipher the meaning of a word by deciphering the meaning of all the other words in that sentence, and just by process of elimination, figuring out what that is. And so that we just keep in mind those tools as we try to decipher this sentence right here. Well, we know that it means that whenever you tap a land for mana. And so we first see this, from the knowledge we already have about Phyrexian, we know that they begin with these tense markers. And this is a tense marker very weird, we had never seen it before, but maybe it means something like, well, whenever, or maybe just when? I don't know, I'm putting a question mark sign here to indicate that I'm not sure. Oh, by the way, I know that question marks are supposed to be like this, but I don't like how they look, and so I write them that way. If you don't like it, like, I'm so sorry for you. But anyway, then this word here, and let me check my notes. Okay, So we don't know what this word is. We don't know what any of these are. So none of these words are words that we have seen before, and we can. So what we have to do is to use the word order to try to figure something out. And we know that this is the end of that sentence. And the verb in English, the verb used in that sentence is whenever you tap a land for mana. So tap, add one mana. So there are two verbs in this sentence, tap and add. And so we know that this one at the end has to be one of those, because in Phyrexian verbs go at the end. But then where is the other one? And here is where you might notice this thing. There is a gap in the line. And that's interesting because, well, for example, sometimes we see gaps in the line, like when they mention here the one. This is a one. I usually just write my ones like this, but here for the sake of clarity, I'm just gonna write it like this. But this is not exactly like a gap in the line because it's introducing another symbol that doesn't match very well with the line. But here, this is different. This is not a word separator, because when they separate words in Phyrexian, they use this symbol right here, for example. And this is not the end of a sentence, because at the end of the sentences we have this symbol. So I think that this is a comma. You see how this has a comma right here? And okay, in Magic the Gathering, like the wording of the rules has to be extremely careful, because if you change a when for an if, or commas or semicolon, all of those things can matter for how a card works in the game. And rule lawyers will tell you that, oh yeah, I don't know the intricacies, but I know that these kinds of things are important. So it makes sense that they included that in Phyrexian. And I actually like, it makes sense for how this language is written, for this punctuation mark to be just a gap in the line. But that also tells us something really interesting. If we have basically like two sentences, then probably this is a verb. And the verb of the first sentence in that word. So whenever you tap a land for mana. So this would be tap. And this would be add. Okay, now we are getting somewhere. Let's see what else we can figure out. Let's try. First, this word for tap is weird because it is too long. So remember that one of our tools is the knowledge that Phyrexian sometimes uses agglutinative morphology. So perhaps this is not just the word tap, but something else, tap and some other word glued together. And what I started doing, and actually let me tell you, this one was really hard to crack. I was just looking at this and I had no idea how to begin. And then I started just in desperation looking for things that appear in other places in this card. At some point, I somehow noticed the following: that you see these symbols here. This goes, yeah. So these symbols here. Hey, what's going on? I don't know why sometimes like the screen moves by itself. Okay. You notice these symbols right here? Let me write like, we know that Phyrexian seems to use a consonantal root system. So let me write just the consonants. Here, here. Oh, by the way, this is not just a line. This is a line with a little swoosh at the end, like, and that makes it. I feel like that's relevant. This is not the same symbol, for example, as in the beginning of Vorinclex, or where, like this symbol here is not the same one as this other letter, but with other diacritics. I think that this little movement, this little swoosh at the end, makes it a different letter. But anyway, we have this second letter here, and finally this third consonant, which we know is an N. So, and we find this same sequence of symbols, in fact with the same vowel, right here. See? In fact, they are right next to each other, and they are the same. But while this one has right after these other symbols, these symbols here, they are completely different from the symbols here. So what's going on? First, maybe it could be a coincidence. Many words in many languages begin with the same symbols at one have similarities at one point or another without them being related. But in this case, all of these things begin like guesses. I think this is mana, and this is mana as well. So mana tap, it would be like tap for mana. Actually, I wrote it horrible. Let me write it better. So yeah, this is a verb that means to tap for mana. And I like it. That's just how an agglutinative language would do it. You would make, instead of saying tap for mana, you create another verb by combining two words that means specifically to tap for mana. And here we have another example of agglutination. And what's the other word that references mana in the card? Whenever you tap land for mana, add one to your mana pool. And yeah, it makes sense that you would combine mana and pool to create a new word that means, well, mana pool. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Sometimes, like, the computer seems to combine some of my lines. Anyway, so we have mana tap and mana pool. And this is amazing because, well, for one now we know how to say pool in Phyrexian and how to say mana. And actually, this also makes me suggest that think that maybe this is ma'an, perhaps like the pronunciation. If this symbol here is pronounced as an M, and this is pronounced like an A, and because this appears in the name for Urabrask, and it appears at the beginning, and you might be confused that, well, what is it doing there, right? Because Urabrask begins with a vowel, a W sound, but there is this thing called the glottal stop. Maybe I'm gonna talk more about this in another video when I talk just pronunciation. But the point is that the glottal stop is this this sound that you use sometimes. In some languages, like Hawaiian, is a consonant by itself, and this is an N. So maybe this is like pronounced like ma-ana or something like this, or maybe in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, they would put glottal stops in between consonants and vowels, something like this. I don't know. I find it very hard to pronounce, but yeah, maybe something like this. So that's exciting because we are also finally after so long we are actually tackling pronunciation. But the most important thing of all of these discoveries is tap. We know how to say tap, or at least we know that the consonantal roots, because the vowels might be different and they might fool you if you're looking for the exact sequence of symbols. But in Phyrexian, you have to look for the consonants. And in fact, I don't know if this is a critique, if this is part of the word, but I'm pretty sure that these two symbols here are not exactly part of the consonant. So whenever we see this sequence of consonants, we know this is meaning to tap something. Also, because we are already here, we find this thing here, which Citrus Inferno told me that has appeared before. It's just it had not appeared by itself before. And okay, I'm gonna tackle this in another video. But yeah, the point is that Citrus Inferno convinced me that this is probably the imperative marker. I wasn't sure of that before, but yeah, now I'm convinced until we find evidence to the contrary. Okay, so now what? We know, remember, because of the subject-object-verb, that, well, first in Phyrexian, when the subject is obvious, they omit it. They like if it is obvious from the context, you don't have to specify it, and that's something that Japanese and Spanish do all the time. And so in this phrase, when it is talking up to the player, when it's saying when you tap a land for mana, we are not gonna find any word for you or for player because it's implied, and so they omit the subject. But that means that what would be right after the tense marker would be the object. And what is the object of the phrase whenever you tap a land for mana? Land. And so by word order, we know that this has to be land. So let me write that here. Actually, well, I'm gonna erase this. And I'm gonna write here land. And that's very cool because we see that land also appears in this other sentence right here. But I'm going to talk more about that when we analyze that sentence. So we have when land mana tap. Okay, we are getting there. And then we have one. And it is an order. It is ordering that you one. And then we have something else. Don't be confused. You might be looking at this and thinking that this is the negation marker, but it is similar. For example, you can see it here, but the order is reverted. Like the negation marker starts with the circle. So this is not the. But we have seen this word before. We know that this means yours, your, or maybe ours. Some people seem to think that it is ours. But whatever it is, we know that it is a possessive. So that's nice, and that makes sense because it is referring to your mana pool, which we have already identified. And so, and here we have just two words more to identify in this sentence. This one and this one. Okay, what are we missing from the original sentence? Okay, we have whenever, we have tap, land for mana, we have add one mana to your mana pool, and here's the part we're missing, of any type that land produced. Okay, so many times we have seen that in Phyrexian, modifiers come at the end. And so if it's talking about any kind, in English, any is modifying kind. And so in Phyrexian, if they have any word that works similar to the word any, would be after the word it is modifying. So I think that this is any, because it also makes sense for these kinds of words to be short in any language, because the words that you use a lot tend to become shorter. People find a way to abbreviate it or to speak less because people are naturally lazy. And so, well, not fundamentally lazy, but that seems to be like a guiding principle in language, that things simplify up to a certain point, and there seems to be a balance between the language being simple to speak and being simple to understand, and so it seems to reach a point of equilibrium between the expectations of the speaker and the listener. But anyway, I'm getting sorry. Sometimes I go in these tangents. Tell me what you think of my tangents. But the point is that this is type, which you have probably already guessed from everything I was saying up to that point. So that's nice. We managed to translate everything in this sentence. And we have a lot of certainty of all of these translations here. So we have when land mana tap. Order one yours type any mana pool add. And yeah, I know it maybe seems like a little bit jumbled around. I think it was designed to seem unnatural to English speakers, and it certainly does. But there are many other languages in the world that use sometimes word orders like this one, so it is completely believable and makes sense. Now let's analyze the second sentence. We find again this tense marker that it is the same in this other sentence, which makes sense because both sentences in the original card start with whenever. So yeah, probably this means when or something like that. And then we have the word for opponent, which as always, remember, it is made by opposite and player. So the opposite of the player is the opponent. And then we have land, which we identified from the previous sentence. And then we have a ton of things that we don't know what they are. But let's see how we can use the tools we have to figure this out. First, we see that the word land appears more than once in that sentence. And here it is, again. So this is land. But we see that it is also preceded by this thing. And that's interesting because, let's go back to the original. It mentions that whenever an opponent taps a land, so any land for mana, that's land. And this is interesting because this is one of those things with the rules of Magic. Yeah, these rules are analyzed like lawyers would analyze laws. And so when it says that land, So it is referring to that specific land, and that's a very important piece of meaning that has to be conveyed. And so I think that probably these three symbols here maybe mean something like that or this or something along those lines. And in fact, if I remember, I also completed the Duolingo course in Irish, and in Irish they have a very interesting way to mark like specific things, and they didn't have a difference. If I remember correctly, if you speak Irish and I'm wrong, sorry, but there wasn't a difference between that and this. So maybe there isn't a difference like that in Phyrexian. But whatever it is specifying like this specific instance of this noun. Okay, so let's look at what else do we know. Also, we can find actually right here, we have previously seen that the consonantal root for the word control, and we have seen it in, I think, the card for Eleanor, is something like this. This line this way, this line this way, and then this line this way. This is the consonantal root for control. And here it is. Sorry. But also it's weird that there is one extra consonant here at the end. And yeah, this is one of those times when I think like, oh, well, maybe this isn't control. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I mean, there are many words, again, there are many words that are similar, but are not necessarily related. But it makes sense for this to be control in this case, because if we go back to the original sentence, oops, no, sorry, that's shieldred, that's from a future episode. Okay, here it is. It is talking about that land doesn't untap during its controllers. So it makes sense for us to find the word control here. But also very interestingly, where was I? Okay, here. This is control, and this thing that comes before control, this is actually... Okay, now that I mentioned shieldred, let me bring up shieldred again. The word for the... Because this is something that I didn't figure out until I looked at the card for shieldred. The card for shieldred says shieldred whispering one. So the one who whispers, something like that, right? And when we look at the Phyrexian version of shieldred, do you see these three symbols here? Let me write them here so that we can check them out later. So this is the symbol, which is sounds like an N. And let me write the vowel too, why not? And then we have this thing, and then the star, and then something like this maybe. And then, actually I should have included this one here. And do you see how these are the same symbols that we see here? And so it seems very confident. Thanks, children. I don't need you right now anymore. It seems that these symbols here indicate they turn verbs into noun. They take whisper into whispering one. They take controller into the one who controls. Basically, it seems that in Phyrexian you can take a verb, any verb, and if you put these symbols before it, it would be like the ones who does that action. And English does something very similar. For example, if you take something like blend, and you put an ER at the end, is blender, the one who blends. And in fact, something very similar happens in Spanish, for example. But what is the exact meaning of this thing? I'm not sure at this moment. I mean, we could translate it as one, but I'm going to translate it right now as person. Not because I think that it literally means person, but to remind me that it is changing the word, for example, here, control, into a noun, in this case, into a person that does the action, right? Anyway, so the person that controls. And then we have this very weird thing here. It's just a very short word. And I think, and I'm just guessing, that perhaps this is another tense marker. Because there is, in the original one, they mentioned during that person's, during that controller on tap step, whatever. So that during, it seems like the kind of word that in Phyrexian would be its own tense marker. So yeah, I think that maybe this is during. Now let's analyze this word here. And first, remember the root for mana. Here it is. Here we see the word mana, and in fact, remember how it was tap. And in fact, This is why I told you that we should look only at the consonants, because if you look at these two instances here, they are different in this vowel here. And so you may think like, oh yeah, no, they are different. But no, just look at the consonants. The consonants tell you like what the word is. And so this is mana and this is tap. And the different consonants are probably because here it is talking about you, the player, tapping something for mana. But in this case, it is talking about your opponent tapping something for mana. But then it has this thing here at the start, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know what this is. Yeah, I have no idea what this thing is supposed to be. And it appears again in this sentence, and that bothers me a lot, but I'm gonna talk more about it when we finish translating this. Because we actually still have a way to go. Let me erase this. And okay, I'm gonna make more space here. Okay, so here we have this thing, and look at it. It is just one word. It is just one huge word. And so it's very cool. That's something like what German does. German is famous for having these very long words. But also many other languages that are agglutinative do that, like inuktitut. And also, we have here this letter that we had never seen before, and that bothers me horribly, because why have we never seen that letter before? What is it doing there? Like, why does this specific word have that letter but no other? Anyway. But we see here the negation marker, or the opposition marker. So that's nice and familiar. And right after we see tap. But remember, we just look at the consonants, because in fact here you look and see that, for example, in this example it has two vowels in between. Here it just has one vowel. And so, but remember, we just care about the consonant. Most of the time we just care about the consonants in Phyrexian. Or the consonants can tell us what the word is, and everything else is just plurals and tenses and stuff like that. And then and so that this is like on, tap, nice. On tap also, from previous examples, we have already recognized this as the word for step, like a step in the game. It could also be like section or something like that. Then we have this other thing here, which I don't know what it is. No clue whatsoever. Then we see, let me go to the last column. But here, first we see these two symbols here, which remember are the same ones. Let me zoom out so you can see it. Yeah, so here when it says mana tap, there is this symbol here, and it is the same as in here. Well, these two symbols. And I don't know what this is doing in both of these instances. But again, here we have the negation marker, and then we have the word for tap again. And of course, the vowels are a little bit different, but that doesn't matter. So this is on, tap, I don't know what this is. And finally, since the card was talking about the next on tap step, perhaps this means next. And so this giant word here could be the next on tap step. So now let's try to read it word for word. So it would be when opponent land mana tap during person that controls this land next on tap step on tap. And this is frustrating because, okay, this one was the hardest one to translate by far, because there were so many words we didn't know, and we had to do so many tricks with logic and assumptions that fortunately they paid off. We can be pretty confident about most of this. But the problem is that this is missing a negation somewhere. Because look, it says that whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't on tap during its controller's next on tap step. And so, and if you just read this, it just says like, oh, when an opponent taps a land for mana during that controller's next on tap step, on tap. it doesn't say that you don't untap it. It's actually telling you to untap it, which is just like how it normally works in the game. And then we look at all of these things that we are not sure about. Perhaps even this thing for next, maybe it doesn't mean next. I'm gonna. And so something here must be acting as a negation. But for example, would it make sense for this thing here to be a negation? But it is modifying this noun, the next untap step. Why would the noun have the negation for the verb? Well, it's not unheard of to put negations of verbs in nouns. But if you do it, at least it's the noun that is doing the action or something. It's just putting the negation in this noun seems very unnatural to me. I don't know if there's any language that would do something similar to that. And then you might think, oh, well, maybe this it is related to this word that you don't, well, to these symbols that you don't know what they are. That would be my conclusion if if these symbols weren't also at the beginning of this mana tab thing here. Because if this would be a negation, so don't untap, then it would tell when an opponent doesn't tap for mana. Yeah, it doesn't make this verb cannot be negated, right? And so if this is not a negation, then this isn't a negation, and it would be very weird for this to be a negation. So we're ran out of options. We are missing one negation, and there's nowhere to find it. So a possibility is that whomever made this translation perhaps made a mistake. And it feels very weird to suggest that, because whomever did this translation, they presumably have access to a book explaining all the grammar of the Phyrexian language. I don't know. We are all humans. It's a possibility, and in fact, it wouldn't be the first time that there are many stories of linguists and archaeologists finding mistakes in scriptures written thousands of years ago. In fact, there is this whole thing when they were deciphering the language of the Hittites. There was this disagreement between scholars of how many kings were listed in a historical Hittite book. Like the Hittites wrote a book about their history, and they listed how many kings had they had, like so. And then they say like, oh, they are listing 14 kings or something like that. One of them said like, no, it's 15 because they made a mistake in this, and these are supposed to be two different kings. And no one believed him until later they found many other examples, and they were able to see like, oh yeah, that whomever the scribe who wrote this made a mistake, and yeah, there was one more king or one less. I don't remember the story, but the point is that maybe or either this is a mistake or we are overlooking something or something like that. But anyway, so that's it for today in the terms of translating Vorinclex. Also, soon, I don't know when, but soon, I'm gonna be doing a live stream of me trying to decipher Phyrexian live. I don't know if that's gonna work, because sometimes I sit down to try to decipher something and I get nowhere in half an hour. And sometimes I do find stuff. So I don't know what's gonna happen in that session. And I don't know how I'm gonna make it, because I have to figure out how that would work in terms of the technology and make sure that I've never used Twitch, honestly. But anyway, so that's something that I am working on. And so tell me if you're interested about that. Stay tuned for that. And maybe if that session ends up being successful, if I end up discovering something there, then be assured that I'm gonna make a video explaining that. Also, just keep in mind that if I ramble and I go in tangents in these videos, it is edited. I edit that out most of the time to make these ones shorter. But in that one, I wouldn't be able to do that because it would be live. So it's just something to consider about. Well, anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Get vaccinated if you can. Learn how to recycle. Learn a language. Do exercise. Take care of yourself. Anyway, and be happy.